Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Today's webinar is on 2 ways to use AI for tabletop simulations. My name is Max McKenna, the Director of Partnerships here at NCA. Really appreciate you all taking the time to join the webinar today. Today's webinar is going to be presented by our friends at Chaos Track. So I'll hand over to Josh in a minute, and he will walk through, you know, tabletop simulations, the challenges with them, some free ways of using things like ChatGPT or Claude to do them, and then he'll also talk through the work that Chaos Track does with clients around tabletop simulations. This webinar is being recorded, so within 24 hours, we'll be able to share that recording with you. And if you have any questions at all, we'll get to those at the end. The presentation should be just under about 30 minutes, and we'll have plenty of time for questions. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And then I will get to those, as mentioned, once the meat of the webinar is complete. With that, I will hand over to you, Josh. And yeah, we'll see you again at the Q&A portion.
Great. Thanks, Max. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Fantastic. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to talk about tabletops. For those of you who have never been through tabletops, I want to start by giving a little bit of an explanation about what they are. And tabletops are something that I've grown to both love and hate, and I'll explain why. Tabletops are simulations of cybersecurity or business continuity events, typically. A talented tabletop facilitator will come in with a story in mind and will present a little bit of the story to the audience. And the audience is usually a collection of fairly senior people in an organization. You typically want, IT people, cybersecurity people, legal people, HR people, and some executives are going to need to make some business decisions. And basically, you kind of play a game of Dungeons and Dragons for grown-ups. You don't have to get geeky with the dice, but the person who is facilitating the tabletop simulation gives a little bit of the story. The participants discuss what they're going to do and what they're going to do first. And then the facilitator will respond and give them a little bit more of the story. And by the time they end, and these usually last 2, 3, 4 hours, though I've seen some that more complicated ones that might last an entire day, the organization has had a really in-depth and insightful conversation about what they would really do in the face of a pretty serious attack. Now, there are many companies, and I know this is mostly an IT-centric crowd, and maybe some of you work for IT service providers. There are many companies that need to do tabletops to satisfy regulatory requirements, right? Like HIPAA, CMMC, SOC 2, pick your alphabet soup there. They all have language that says that organizations must test their incident response plan on a regular basis. And the most common way that organizations do that is by using tabletop exercises. Typically, there's no automation in these tabletops. The presenter will come in maybe with a PowerPoint or kind of a Word doc that they work off of, and it's really just a facilitated conversation. I personally, and this is one of the reasons I love tabletops, is I've never seen anything other than an actual breach that engages the executives of an organization more than a tabletop simulation. There's something about putting them in the story and watching their faces fall, and you can tell that their hearts are dropping as the story gets worse and worse and worse. And also a really important dynamic that I've seen tabletops address is oftentimes less sophisticated executives think that cybersecurity is something that the techies take care of. It's an IT problem. And by putting them in the story and making them realize, no, there's some really serious business decisions that you're going to have to make as an executive. Do you pay the ransom or do you not? Do you notify clients or do you not? These are all things that IT can help, but that are really what slow down responses to actual real world incidents. So I would love to, if I could wave a magic wand, I would love to get to a point where companies are doing tabletops more frequently than maybe once a year to satisfy compliance requirements, if only because, there are hundreds of ways that organizations can be breached. And by just doing it once a year, you're only going to touch on a few of them. Sometimes we've seen service providers offer tabletops as well as part of their service. And that can get interesting because then you're talking about kind of cross-vendor collaboration in the face of an incident. Um, but the reason I love them is that sort of changing of hearts and minds. The reason I hate them is they're a huge pain in the ass to plan and implement. They take a tremendous amount of work to set up. You really have to customize each tabletop for the organization that you're going into. If one company uses CrowdStrike and another company uses SentinelOne, you don't want to be going and talking about SentinelOne to the company who's using CrowdStrike. That's a really simple example, but you have to make sure that the simulation you're doing actually makes sense in the context of the tools that the company is using as well as the security controls that they're using. So it takes a lot of time to prep. It takes a lot of time to execute. The other thing that's interesting about actually doing the tabletops is they're not really all that scalable. It's really hard to get people to take even a few hours off of their day jobs, especially if they're executives in a company. So, by getting them to sit in a room for a few hours, that automatically limits the number of people who are going to be able to participate. So the tabletops that I've seen, it's typically 10 to 20 people at best. And frankly, sometimes some of the people are bored, kind of waiting for their turn. But I think that's worth it, right? I think having those discussions about who's going to do what in response to a real incident, having lived through a number of incidents myself, building that muscle memory is hugely valuable. So in terms of the time to prepare a tabletop simulation, that's the first thing that I wanted to talk through today. We've built a platform that uses AI to deliver cybersecurity simulations. And one of the things we had to figure out early on was how can we make the process of planning a tabletop much faster, much more automated, much easier to execute. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and kind of walk you through some of the prompts that we use in building simulations. And I'm hoping that if folks can't see my screen, that someone will speak up. I'm going to assume you can see my screen unless I hear otherwise.
We can.
So thanks, Max. So the example that I chose for today's discussion is this Change Healthcare cybersecurity attack. I picked this because even in this congressional testimony, there's some wonderful technical details that the AI just loves to work off of. And before the call, I downloaded this page as a PDF. And the reason I did that is I vastly prefer Anthropic Claude, specifically their newest model, 3.5 Sonnet, for this kind of work. We've extensively tested a number of LLMs, and Claude is by far the best for creating stories and planning the kinds of things that we need to plan for a tabletop simulation. So the prompt I like to use to start off is, let me just paste it in. It's kind of broken up into a few parts. The first part tells the LLM, hey, this is the role I need you to play. So you're a cybersecurity expert, and I mentioned tabletops as well. That results in a better result. The other technique that we use a lot is prompt chaining, starting with a small prompt to get some input from the LLM and then eventually building on it and building on it, building on it until we're happy with the result. I like to start by asking it for multiple ideas that I can then choose from. And then the other thing that we found is very important for this is be sure to define the roles of the people who are actually going to be participating in a tabletop. Sometimes companies will do just IT and security focused tabletops. Sometimes they'll do just executive team focused tabletops. And that gives the LLM the context about who's going to be in the room to help it figure out what kinds of discussions we expect to have. Now, if we were using ChatGPT, we could have just given it the link to that article that I showed you, because ChatGPT can go out to the internet. Unfortunately, Claude isn't able to do that. And that's why we upload the PDF and then we're off to the races. So let's see what it comes up with. It's different every time, and that's part of the fun of doing it this way. I'm going to let it finish responding, and then I'm going to go back up to the top. So the first one, the overlooked gateway. This is for a server that can't support modern MFA without significant modifications. Number two is, it's not ransomware, it's a ransom attack. I'm probably going to do this one because I like this. Scenario three, data exposure. So this is a double ransom, right? This is where the company paid the ransom, but then the information was released anyway, and asking what the company's going to do with it. This fourth one, the integration audit. Okay, so this is buying new systems and integrating them. And then the fifth one is the actual congressional hearing, which, if you want something that's technically focused, probably isn't the best bet. So I'm going to go with scenario two. I'm going to go with the ransom dilemma. And now I'm going to start to get more specific. So I like scenario two. Please expand the scenario for a company that uses, let's do, that is a 200-person hospital that uses Microsoft 365, Epic EMR, and Windows 10 computers. So now we're making it more specific for the client or for the place where you work, where you actually want to do the tabletop simulation. And now hopefully what it's going to do is it's going to start to build a pretty detailed story. And this is the great part that we really like, especially about this Anthropic Claude model, is it actually starts to think through realistic timelines of what may or may not happen. And you can see here as I go through this, it's not only telling you the parts of the story to reveal to the participants, but it's even giving you some specific discussion points and decisions that you could use to facilitate the conversation, because ultimately that's what a tabletop is. It's a facilitated conversation. Now, don't take this as gospel, right? Take this, edit it, copy it out into Word, copy it back in, and then move forward with it. But for the sake of this exercise, we're going to just go through what it gives us. The next thing we like to do, and I'm going to copy and paste this prompt in. The next thing we like to do is have it come up with ideas about the first thing that happens in the tabletop simulation. This is what you want to tell your participants when you're facilitating a tabletop, is the first thing that happens. And you want to be careful because you don't want to give away too much of the story. So the prompt that I like to use is, please give me 5 ideas about how the tabletop could start. And then I tell it a little bit about what a good starting point is, right? It's not giving away the entire story. And as you can see here, we're just building and building and building on top of this until we get to the point where it does what we like. So it's always fun to see what it comes up with, because it's oftentimes a combination of things that a normal person notices, right? An overnight pharmacist noticed something, or a nurse notices something, or sometimes it's something that the IT team noticed. Maybe you got an alert from CrowdStrike, or maybe you got, network lag. Maybe you notice some performance issues on the network. So it does a nice job of coming up with lots of different ideas. And if I didn't like these ideas, I could very easily go back to it and say, no, I don't like these. Give me a few more. So now we have our starting prompt and we have our overall timeline and story and decision point. The other thing that we like to do in the world of tabletops, there's this concept of injects, and injects are things that you throw in to make it more interesting and more difficult. Not to say that a ransom attack isn't difficult enough already, and you certainly don't have to do this, but this is another area where we found that Anthropic Claude does a really lovely job. So let me paste this in here. Please give me 5 ideas for injects that could make this simulation more interesting and more challenging. Now, the nice thing is, because you'll remember in the first prompt, I told it was a cybersecurity expert, and I told it that it had experience with tabletops. I don't have to define what an inject is. It already knows that that's part of the vernacular and is something that it should address. So now it's giving you some curveballs, right? The first is the VIP patient leak. They stole data about a prominent politician. The second is a ventilator is taken offline, which has really serious health impacts. The third one is the insider threat. That's always that always makes for a really interesting tabletop discussion, is when there's insiders involved. Maybe it's not coming from outside. Maybe it's someone who works on the IT team who's actually, giving me data. So now we have a timeline, a story. We have starting points, and we have some curveballs that we can give it. And then what I like to do as the final step, and there's one other thing I'll mention to you just because it's fun. But what I like to do as a final step is just ask it to put it all together. So I might go back and say, okay, I want the locked chart starting prompt, and I want the insider threat inject. Please produce a new sheet for me, and it'll just spit out a really nice document that you can then just take and edit and maybe review it with your inside person who you're doing the tabletop with. The other thing that I like to do, please list the elements of the MITRE attack framework that apply to this scenario. And I know I misspelled attack, so let me fix that, though I don't think it'll matter because LLMs are smart. And this is fun. I like to do this because this often gets IT people prepared to have a technical conversation about what technical steps could be put in place to prevent something like this from happening again. So I'm not going to bore you with the detail of going through this. Just play around with this on your own. And I think you'll find that there's some pretty interesting findings when you relate it back to the MITRE attack framework. And also, if you work at a larger company, I know a lot of larger companies are starting to map their cybersecurity controls over to the MITRE attack framework. So this gives you evidence to prove that you exercise certain controls as part of this tabletop exercise. So as you can see, in just a few minutes, we built a really robust, customized cybersecurity tabletop that you can use with clients if you're an IT provider, or that you can use in your own company. Now that still gets us to the point of doing tabletops the old-fashioned way, right? So the planning is faster, but now what we need to do is we need to find someone to facilitate the conversation. We need to get everyone together, and we need to have kind of an old-fashioned tabletop discussion about the simulation that we just presented. What we've been working on at Chaos Track is, can we take the benefits of a tabletop, which is engaging story-driven tests of how to respond to real-world attacks, and can we make it something that's scalable, so that instead of the 10 to 20 people that you can get in the room, it's something that people can do from their own computers in between their other work. It just takes them a few minutes, but then you get to see kind of how your whole organization does against a real world attack, as opposed to just the 10 people that you can get in the room. So if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, I'll go ahead and show you what we've built there. The way Chaos Track works is that it sends you an email, like every other system, and all you have to do to get into the simulation is go ahead and click on the link. When you first get in, it's going to give you a little tutorial, which I'm sure most people skip. And then what it's going to do is, remember we created that starting prompt back over in Claude? It's going to give you a starting prompt of your own. So in this case, you're an IT admin. This is just a generic trial simulation that we do. So that's why we give all this preamble of, you're using Microsoft 365 and you use CrowdStrike. Obviously, in a real company, you wouldn't have any of this because you'd know it all already. But here's what you would have. One of your end users has contacted you because something is strange. They haven't received any emails from outside the company since yesterday. Now, I'm sure, given the audience on this call, a lot of you have experienced this. You probably already know exactly what's going on here. And that's exactly what we're going to test. So the way the system works is, you just type in what you think you should do. We're not giving you a multiple choice option to pick from, because let's be honest, in a real world incident, you don't have a multiple choice list to pick from. And you're just going to go back and forth with the LLM, kind of having a conversation about what it is that you do and what it is that you don't do. So if you've been through this before, and I'm sure that there's many of you who are Microsoft 365 experts, you always know that if there are email questions, one of the first things you want to do is run a message trace. And you just go back and forth with the AI like this. So in this case, running a message trace was real smart, because you're seeing that emails are arriving, they're going into the inbox, but then they're being sent to the deleted items by an inbox rule that you disabled. And oh no, here's the smoking gun. You see thousands of outbound emails originating from the user account. And sometimes these have images and animations and stuff in them. But the way the gameplay works is you just kind of go back and forth. So at this point, you know something weird is up. So maybe you're going to reset the password. And since the way this works behind the scenes is it's basically AI on guardrails. What we found and what we've continued to find is that the AI hallucinates very quickly if you're just trying to use it to do a simulation. And also just using the AI directly doesn't give you the ability to pull the kinds of reports I'm going to show you in a minute. So what the system is doing is it's matching the user's input using best intent to some pre-configured options. Now, we can't possibly guess all the possible things that someone might imagine that they could do. So we also use AI so that people never get stuck, right? So, you know, I'm tired, I'm going to take a nap. You know, all sorts of crazy things that we see people type in. The other day, I was looking at one of our logs and someone typed in, update my resume and go find a new job when the scenario got too hard. So I thought that was pretty funny. And then the AI comes back and says, hey, that might not be that helpful. You can get a hint as well. So, you know, we've made it really easy for people not to get stuck. But at the same time, this is meant to be challenging. This is meant to kind of give you a little bit of a pit in your stomach because you're staring at a blank screen and you have to think through what it is that you should do in the face of the simulation. So that's the way gameplay works. In the few minutes that we have left, I want to switch back over to our dashboard and show you a couple of reports. Now, these reports are real games. They are customers who used our platform to do simulations. And obviously, they gave us permission to use this data and to anonymize it. This first one that I'm going to show you is a CISO trained all of the IT and security people in their company on a new incident response process to follow. And then 3 weeks later, used our platform to test how well people understood what they had been trained to do. And unfortunately, this is real data. The answer is not very well. 27% is not a great score. And you can see that no one, you know, came even close to getting all the things right that they should have. And where this gets really interesting for me as a chief information security officer is when we get down to here and we're able to look at this both from a person perspective as well as from a recommendation perspective. So I'm going to pick on poor Noah here, not his real name. You know, Noah had just gotten trained on this run book for the exact situation that he had been tested in. And the dude, frankly, didn't even try, right? He requested a hint as the first thing, which told him to go look at the run book. And he didn't even do that because the only thing that he got right is he opened a P2 ticket in ServiceNow. And there's all these other things that Noah had been trained to do that he just didn't do. Whereas if I go back to the dashboard, you know, Angela's our superstar. We want to take what's in her brain and train the rest of the folks. But in this case, I don't think it was a person by person issue. I think it was a training and awareness issue. Because if you look at this, no one of the data that we copied over and anonymized, no one quarantined the computer using CrowdStrike. No one checked other systems for signs of attack, right? Just because you have an attacker in Microsoft 365 doesn't mean that they haven't moved laterally into Salesforce or some other system that you want to check. Most people didn't even bother running CrowdStrike scans because they assumed, oh, well, if it's a breach of Microsoft 365, then we don't have to worry about the endpoints, which, as we all know, is not always the case. Sometimes the path of an intrusion comes through the endpoint. So this becomes a very actionable set of recommendations, not just for each individual person to take, but also for the company to take about doing a better job around policies and procedures and tooling and all those sorts of things. The other thing that our system gives you the ability to do, and this is, you know, we anonymized it. This wasn't really the next day, but you can have people run the same simulation over again, you know, maybe a month later or a few months later. And you can actually demonstrate progress, right? You can show that people got better. You can show that individuals got better, which is wonderful reporting to share with your executive team and your board, who obviously are going to be interested in how you do with this. And in the 3 minutes I have left, I want to show you one other real simple example. The example I just showed you was testing IT and security people on technical things. We've also used this system to just test end users on how well they understand what they need to do when something weird or malicious starts to happen. So in this case, it was the CEO of a software company actually focused on cybersecurity compliance, wanted to make sure that all of his staff knew who to call if they were concerned about a security event. Very simple simulation, right? For the people who participated in the simulation, it took them maybe 60 to 90 seconds. But he got some assurance by looking at the data that actually his folks did really well, right? Most of the people got right to the straight answer. There were a few that kind of meandered around and maybe tried a few weird things, and there was only a handful that really struggled. All they had to do to pass was they had to say, I'm going to call my IT company at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And you can see here, like as you guys know, as IT people, users do all sorts of crazy things, right? First, the user restarted their computer, sent a test email, which is a good instinct. Then they sent an email to the IT company. Not a great idea if the attacker's in your email. Then they called Google Workspace. So they completely kind of missed the boat here. But even in a company that does well, we still had some recommendations and some insights for this company about people who eventually got the right answer, but took a long time to get there, tried lots of different things. So, don't escalate your manager was the most common one. This company didn't want them escalating their manager. They wanted them escalating right to the IT company. So the way the system works is that the scenarios are completely customizable and are customized for each of our clients and are customized for the roles inside those clients. So what you're seeing here is after having a conversation with the company to say, okay, what are the behaviors we want to test and who are the people that we want to test, resulted in the simulations that you're seeing here. So let me get to the questions. I finished my planned comments 60 seconds early, so good timing there. Will we have access to the document used with the prompts? I'd be sharing a soft copy of these prompts. Max, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think we're going to get a list of participants afterwards, in which case I'd be happy to email these out if people are interested.
Yeah, we can include it in the follow-up email.
Great. So the second question, for the scenario, do you outline the role so that the scenario can be run effectively to test folks, i.e. HR, legal, IT, management, public relations? Yes, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head, actually, of kind of how our system has evolved. Initially, we were kind of doing all-in-one scenarios, and what we realized is that the things an IT person is going to do are completely different from the things that a legal person is going to do. So when we create the scenarios, and we are actually using something not too dissimilar from what I showed you here for this piece of it. But when we create the scenarios, we're telling it the roles that we want to exercise, that we want to test. And then the things that they can choose from are relevant to their role. So absolutely. The next question was, the AI creates the scenario, injects recommendations, correct steps, question mark, creates everything. Almost. Right now we have the AI creating, I'd say about 70% of the scenario. And part of what our team does is we'll adjust it manually. But we are actually working on, like if you became a customer, you wouldn't see this because it's internal only right now. But we are actually working on a scenario builder that's completely AI powered, where we give it the context of the incident, of the company, of the escalation path, and then the AI builds it for us entirely automatically. We're expecting to release that as a public facing feature next year in 2025. But for now, the amount of work it takes our clients to actually work with us in creating these scenarios is trivial. It's between an hour and an hour and a half, which is obviously a lot better than than doing all the planning manually. Michael says, I love the concept. Is this sufficient in place of an actual roundtable exercise or simply for validation? Um, Obviously, when you get to regulatory compliance, regulators can sometimes go off on crazy paths. Our opinion is because the regulations say that you have to exercise your incident response plan or test your incident response plan. They don't specifically say you must do a tabletop. We believe that this is a suitable replacement for tabletops. But what I would say as a practitioner is there's still value in tabletops. There's still value in having lots of people getting together and having a conversation, but logistics prevent it from happening all that often. So what I'd like to see is companies occasionally doing tabletops, especially to work out maybe processes that don't exist or to figure out how they might respond to something really complex that they've never imagined before. And then using a system like ours to validate that all the people in an organization know what it is that they're supposed to do. And in fact, the way that we deliver this is we'll run the simulations in our tool, but then typically we'll have a report out to an executive team where we talk through the results, right? We'll go into a dashboard like this and kind of explain some of the recommendations. But then we'd also talk through with the executive team some of the business decisions that they might need to make. And the reason we're not using our tool for the executive team is because there are no right or wrong answers when you get to that level. You know, the decision to pay a ransom, I don't know if any of you have had to live through this. I have. It's a really difficult decision, and there's never an obvious answer. So I would prefer for that to be a discussion to watch how the group thinks about it rather than trying to simulate a ransom payment in a tool like ours. So the next question, are there pre-built templates or do you have to customize your own every time? Right now, the answer is yes to both. So we have some pre-built scenarios. I don't know how many of them are loaded in our demo system here. Yeah, a number of them are. So we have a number of pre-built scenarios, but each of these still must be, we call it semi-customized for each client, right? VPN account takeover. Well, we need to know, do you have MFA on your VPN? What kind of VPN are you using? Is your VPN fully patched, right? So those are the kinds of details that we talk with a client about during that short onboarding process. And then we work, we use the AI to semi-customize it to make sure that it represents your organization. How many scenarios could an organization have for their account? That's a question from Morgan. The way it works is you can have an unlimited number of scenarios, but the way our pricing works is it's per scenario. And a scenario includes multiple games. And the way we define a game is it is the same story, but different roles. So you might have one game for IT. You might have one game for all your end users. You might have one game for help desk. So the pricing matrix that we use starts at a per scenario cost, and then the price goes up with the number of games that you do and the number of users that go through it. And then the price goes down with the number of scenarios, kind of a volume discount thing. Tracy asked, how much does this tool cost? So the standard price today per scenario, which includes 2 games, is $5,000, and that gets you access for a year. In the future, we're going to be looking to introduce per user pricing, but we're not there yet. That's probably a later 2025 thing. Max, do you mind that I'm just kind of blitzing through the questions? Did you
No,
want to
go
handle
for
this?
it. I'm trying to clear them out as you answer them.
Okay, cool. George asked, did you try extending tabletop scenario with some cyber physical simulations? Are they generated by AI? I'm not sure I fully understand this question. George, could you give me an example or two in the Q&A, and then I'll circle back to that. We have had some clients have physical things happen during their simulation, but it's still in the context of talking back and forth with the AI. So it's not actually physical. They're not doing anything real world. But let me know if that answers your question or not, George. Oh, a cyber range. So we're not trying to compete with the cyber ranges, George, because we feel that that market is doing a nice job already. So we're not integrated with those. We're looking at it for the future. And the way we think about it is that this is quite different, right? A cyber range teaches you how to use Splunk to do threat hunting, or a cyber range teaches you how to look in CrowdStrike for threat hunting, which are very important skills for cybersecurity teams. We're more focused on, we all joke about layer 8, right? We're focused on, do the people know where they're supposed to go and what they're supposed to do, right? So I don't care, just using this as an example. I don't care to test that to go into the Exchange admin center. And actually, I think they've moved it since we wrote this, but to run a message trace. I just care that that such a thing exists as part of your forensic activity. Sorry, I'm just looking at the questions. Who are your competitors? We're aware of a couple of companies that are, every vendor is going to say this. I don't know that we have competitors. I don't think that's true. I mean, I think our biggest competitor is people doing their own tabletops internally and feeling like they don't need a tool. There's a cyber range company called Immersive Labs that has something that's kind of like this, but it's very different in the way they deliver it. It's more multiple choice options and sort of decision trees, which I personally don't really like because, as I mentioned before, you're not presented with a multiple choice list. Ours is much more fluid and organic, whereas theirs is more almost like I'm dating myself, but a choose your own adventure story, or if you're a little younger, maybe a Goosebumps story where you actually, you're only given a couple of options and you need to choose from them. Paul asked, do you ingest the customer's policies and run books beforehand? Absolutely. Yeah. What we do is and I'll flash back to that kind of internal scenario generation piece. Sorry, I'm in the wrong window. What we do is actually we either upload them or we use an LLM to summarize them, because some of those policies are a little long, which frankly I think is not a good thing. So we'll use an LLM to summarize them and put them right in the AI generation process. Is there a limit on number of participants or games per scenario? No hard limits, no system limits. We're a fairly new startup, so we haven't tested against tens of thousands of people yet, but we've tested with hundreds, and it works very nicely. Joe asked, can scenario participants refer back to game as a refresher lessons learned? Right now, the participants can't, but the client could do that very easily. If I go back over to our dashboard, and let's say, let me go back and pick on that guy, Noah, right? There's no reason that the company couldn't just download this report as a PDF and send it to Noah so that he sees the entire transcript of what he did and what he missed. We've talked about maybe making this information available directly to the players, and we may in the future. But what we wanted to be careful about is that we wanted to leave the control to the company about what kind of educational steps they take. So what you ask is definitely technically feasible. We just haven't done it yet. pricing, can you explain that again? 1 year access, but what was the caveat about what was included? So, sorry for making that confusing. For just kind of budget calculations, a good number to use is $5,000 per scenario. And then I think if you want more specific pricing than that, let's follow up offline, because we do have a pricing calculator where the price goes up if you have more games and more users. It goes down if you do volume purchasing, if you buy more scenarios. So happy to, I'm a CISO, so I'm not going to try and be super salesy. I'm happy to just answer the questions directly if you want to contact me. Should the person who has set up, configured the scenario play in the game or step back from it? This is a great question, and the answer varies by company. So you're right. Anytime you do a tabletop or any kind of simulation, you kind of want to have an inside person who kind of tells you the details about the organization. And one of the first things we'll ask them is whether they want to participate or not. If they want to participate, then we are a bit clever in the way we ask them questions. We're not revealing the entire scenario to them. Maybe we'll just reveal a little bit of it. But sometimes the inside person does not want to participate because they want to be a full partner in building out the scenario. So we've done it either way. What has been the general feedback of AI desktop from those who have used or trialed it so far? Is this global or mainly US? So far, all of our clients have been in the US. That's not true. We just closed a client in Canada, and we've talked to some clients in the UK. Unfortunately, right now for this year, it's all in English, and that kind of limits, obviously, the ability to deploy it. And in certain countries, especially those like France that have a mandatory rule that all trainings must be delivered in French. Oh, Max, shoot, I'm sorry. You marked it as answered, and I forgot the first part of the question.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Let me see if I can go back to the answered one.
It's about the general feedback we've received so far, Josh.
Oh, general feedback has been very positive. It has, especially around the data, right? The gameplay is fairly simple, and that's by design. We don't want it to be too complex for people. But the feedback, people get really excited when they see all of these actionable findings in black and white, or in our case, white and black, that show the steps that they need to take. Answer live. If you're doing research on companies like Chaos Track, how would you define yourself? That's a topic that Pramod and you heard Pramod chime in. He's our co-founder, that Pramod and I often debate. I would search for things like automated tabletop simulations, automated cybersecurity testing platforms, those kinds of things. It's an area where there is a lot of confusion and overlap in the way that vendors describe themselves. So we actually wrote a blog post that talks about how we're different from, you use KnowBe4 as an example, how we're different from phishing and education tools, how we're different from cyber ranges, how we're different from a few other categories of tools that are all out there and all kind of focused broadly on the same problem, but that attack it fairly differently. Happy to share that if there's any interest for that. What if the company's policy is flawed? Does the AI understand what is proper responses, and will it correct? Great question. During that setup process that I mentioned, one of the things we will do is we will review the company's policies, both manually, because we have a lot of experience in this area, but also using AI. And we will go back to the client and suggest if there are things that are missing. Here's a real simple example that we just ran into. We were doing an end user simulation. We were doing an end user simulation for an insurance company. And this was a ransomware attack. So, they get the dreaded pop-up on their screen of, hey, all your files belong to us. So obviously you want to call IT, but less obviously, one of the best practices that's out there is you want to disconnect your computer from the network without shutting it down, so that it's kind of in an artificial quarantine. And this varies by company, right? Some companies have SentinelOne and CrowdStrike, and they would want to do the quarantine through that. But that was one of the examples that we discussed with the client ahead of time, which is to say, hey, do you want to test people on this or not? In their case, they did. So there is a sanity check process in there. Michael, to your question, the AI will understand proper responses, but it will always default to what the company says they want their process to be after we go through that sort of sanitizing process. When you submit an answer, is it one answer only, or does it accept dynamic answers? So if the answer is exchange message trace, but you only say message trace, will it accept the answer, or does it expect the exact answer? Great question. It does not expect the exact answer at all. Let me see if I can get back to the game. So, check, let's do something kind of vague. Check MFA. I think this will bring up a couple of responses. The AI is basically doing some scoring in the back end to see, how closely it matches with some of the things that we've pre-configured. So, and you can also, check, you can also, like, it's really good at even typos or misspelled things. So it's very flexible in that way. Can you also run department level tabletops? Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, when you think about it, simulation being kind of organized by role, you might have an IT department, you might have a legal department. That's a great way to think about it. What if individuals have multiple roles? Can you test that same person over these roles? Yeah, absolutely. You could and this is why the customization is needed, Michael. It's a really insightful question, because there's not always a hard line between IT and cybersecurity, and especially in smaller companies. And sometimes those are the same people. So we might put things into a big IT and cybersecurity bucket, or we might separate them out into IT versus cybersecurity, and that's part of the customization that we work through with a client. Paul asked, in the beginning, you used attack framework. Do you use any frameworks within your tool? Can frameworks be selected based on what customers use? Yes. So we use different NIST response frameworks specifically when we're building scenarios. Again, this is just a demo system for something that we use internally, but you can see the different incident response frameworks here that we can use. We have tested also adding in the MITRE ATT&CK references to the results. And I think the feedback we got is that was fairly confusing, but it would be pretty trivial to do if we ever wanted to re-add that back in the future. Don asked, do you have a scenario that's end-to-end, i.e. starts with help desk taking a call and ends with executive deciding whether or not to pay a ransom? Don, that's actually where we started. And what we found was two things. One, the logic of the scenario got a little too complex and sometimes ended up in some dead ends that obviously we want to avoid. But the other thing we found is that when we did end-to-end scenarios, clients, they cared less about the tool and they cared more about us leading a traditional tabletop for them. So while we were using the tool, we were still basically delivering traditional tabletops, and that's just not the business model that we were, frankly, that we were going after. So now we have the technical ability to do end-to-end scenarios, but it's not our core competency. You'd be better off hiring, the likes of Mandiant or some of the other incident response companies to do a true end-to-end simulation. And that, frankly, should be an old school tabletop, because that's where you're going to have the discussions that are so important.
Josh, can I add something here? So it is
Please.
our exercise is still end-to-end. That is, Josh talked about multiple games within a scenario. So you have the end user, you have the IT, you have the security. So these are different games. They're just given in an asynchronous fashion that they can do it by themselves. What Josh is talking about is the traditional tabletop where you have end-to-end all in a single game. That is what we've moved away from. We can still do end-to-end, but it is all different games given to different sets of individuals who are not sitting in the same room and discussing. That's the big difference. Hopefully that answers the question. Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, no, not at all. Thank you. That was great. And there was also another question about pricing that I just answered directly in the chat. So look for the answer there, and if it still doesn't make sense, please let me know. Where is that blog post located? So I'll just show you on the site, and then can also where is it? Here it is. I can also send out the link afterwards as a follow-up item. But it's just right here, and it kind of talks through. Oh wait, that's not the right one. I'm sorry. Huh, weird. I don't see it. Okay, I'll send the link out afterwards. I know we have it. I'm just not sure where it is. Are you FedRAMP approved? No, we are not, unfortunately, at this point. That's something that we'd like to work towards, but we're in the early stages. And I think that's all the questions. Let me just look through some of the answered ones to see if there's anything we want to add.
Yeah, I think there was a couple Promode answered while you were still presenting, so I don't know if that's stuff that's been covered or not. And there's another question that came in. Have you considered state ramp? Texas ramp?
Yeah, we have considered it. Like, again, we're not there yet. You know, if you've worked with early stage software vendors, they tend to be opportunistic about these kinds of things. We certainly, if we needed to do state ramp or text ramp to win a deal, then we would make it happen. Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate all the great questions, very insightful questions here, and honestly, a lot of things that Pramod and I debate fairly frequently. Thanks for the great feedback. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Max, what's the process by which people will get the recording and the follow-up items?
Yep. So we will have the recording processed by the end of the day today. We will, I'll connect with you, Josh, just about anything you want to include in the follow-up email, and we will share that with everyone. If not by tomorrow morning, then definitely by tomorrow afternoon. So within 24 hours.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. This was a lot of fun. Really appreciate all the time and attention.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining. Take care.
Take care. Bye.